the state of the 49ers franchise and give a little quick update on Deebo Samuel's saga. We'll be right back after our intro.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
How's it going, Rohan? Welcome back for another episode of this 49ers Red Zone. This is your co-host, Marco, with my boy, Rohan. How's it going, Rohan?
Doing good, man. How are you? I love this time. It's spring break for me, so you know what that means. 49ers talk. Yeah.
Must be nice. See, I go on spring break for work next week, so I'm going camping this weekend, and then that whole rest of the week I'm off. I work one of the day. I picked up a shift for another school district, so excited for that.
Okay.
Man. So you're living the life right now, chilling. How was the weather out there? Was it raining out there too?
No, it's not raining yet. I think it'll probably rain though today. I think it was supposed to rain in the morning, and it'll probably rain sometime today as well. It's pretty chilly though, in a way, in terms of that like windy kind of weather.
Yeah, so we got that nice cold weather earlier today. Got some nice rain going down, and it came down pretty hard for a little bit. Sun came out, and it's just very cold and very windy. But let's get
Right.
to 49ers football. Let's give a quick update, as we should, on the Deebo Samuel saga. I mean, little stuff's coming out, right? So Peter King came out with an article today. He ended up saying, I think the Niners are going to be in a quandary if Deebo insists on getting paid top of market and getting paid now. They might not be able to do that. Yes, I saw that he did. Oh, I saw what he did over the season. This season, Samuel was the MVP of a Final Four team in the playoffs, but his average receiving seasons over the past 2 years, 55 catches for 898 yards, is dwarfed, for instance, by Diggs' average over the past 2 seasons from 115 catches to 1,380 yards. So he goes in talking about, he's pretty much saying that he doesn't know if the 49ers are going to be able to pay him, even though he's the all-star he is and superstar he is. It kind of sounds like the 49ers are putting this in his ear. What do you think of his comments about Deebo Samuel, Rohan?
Right. So I mean, Peter King, he comes out, and it was a long column, right? And this was like he kind of made it clear that this is somewhat of his assumption, right? That the 49ers wouldn't be able to, in a way, wouldn't match the demands of Deebo Samuel. As part of the argument, I mean, the 898 thing, I didn't really render that really as important. He played in only 8 games last year, so that's why his stats were lower. But when you look at it, I mean, it does show that mass media, like we said, just this past weekend, just show that the 49ers and Deebo Samuel probably are at some sort of tension in a way. But like the 49ers have shown in the past, I mean, we had a similar predicament with Fred Warner, where 49ers fans were irate that the extension come and then it came. I do think that this is a little bit of a higher magnitude because of the amount of money being discussed, whereas the last two, the guaranteed, like in terms of Warner and Kittle, guaranteed money isn't that high. But at this point, I do think, like I said on Sunday, I do think the draft, right? That's the selling point. If we don't get anything done by the draft, I do think then that Deebo Samuel probably remains a 49er. I'm of the argument that they should keep him. Obviously, Peter King here, he's another guy that's just harping onto the comments where there is a bit of uneasiness right now. But I think with any negotiation, there should be some form of uneasiness with both sides trying to get their want. But eventually, my belief is that they'll find a compromise.
So initially, when I saw that, I was like, okay, well, this is kind of funny because Peter King is actually someone very close to the 49ers organization, right? He sat in the war room during the draft before. This is who he is. Like, he comes out and he likes to spread a lot of 49ers news, and he actually, a lot of times, he has a lot of valid reasons and valid information. So for me, when I saw that, like, whoa, that's not just anybody talking now. Like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, if they're talk, I don't really listen. But when Peter King's actually saying this, I'm like, whoa, this is someone that's very close to John Lynch. And it made me think, like, is John Lynch actually feeding this information to Peter King? Like, because throwing the stats out there over the last 2 years sounds like something a team would say. It doesn't sound like an analyst would say, like, oh, well, if we compare him to Dig, like, why are you comparing him to Diggs? You know what I mean? Like, that's just something that doesn't make sense to me. I understand Diggs is one of the highest paid receivers, but from a team standpoint, that sounds like something an NFL team would say on why they shouldn't pay their player and give like an explanation. Well, this is why. I mean, maybe if you guys look at the stats, like even though they're two different styles of player, and I believe they both bring the same electricity to their respective teams. So I thought that's very interesting. Deebo Samuel is also there was a picture or whatever people want to call it.
I
Deebo
love that.
Samuel.
Yeah.
So
It was on Instagram where there was a post. One of his friends kind of posted, "If it ain't 25 million, we don't want it." And then Deebo Samuel obviously comment on that, kind of reiterating the fact that he kind of believes that as well. It was pretty funny to me. I mean, personally, that's totally fine. I mean, no guaranteed money in that statement at all. You can pay him 5 years, 125 million, as long as the guaranteed money is reasonable, in my opinion. So, but I mean, it does show that obviously, like the main point is Deebo Samuel is looking to get paid near the top of the market, somewhere around the top five receivers in terms of average annual value. So that's like kind of like the main point on it, and
and
it does show like he's taking to social media to continue that.
and what I've seen from that, Rohan, is he's not going to only want the average per year. He's going to want the guaranteed money to go with that. You know what I mean? Like
Probably, yeah, of course.
he understands that the guaranteed money is where it's at. But that's a quick little update on Deebo Samuel. Me and Rohan are going to go a quick state of the franchise episode, talking about where we think the 49ers are headed, if they're headed in the right direction, if they're not. We're going to talk to you about that right now. We're also going to talk about the NFL draft a little bit, like positions of needs and whatnot. That is a state of the 49ers franchise. But before we do that, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Comment down below. Make sure you guys let us know how we're doing. So let's get into it, Rohan. State of the 49ers franchise. Should we begin on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive side of the ball where everyone is talking because the 49ers have a young quarterback and a receiver who wants to be extended?
Let's go with the most buzzing side. Let's start with the offense, where the 49ers didn't make as many moves necessarily this offseason, but obviously the biggest one surrounds the rookie quarterback that was in the room last year. Where do you think the 49ers are offensively? And are you in any way concerned? Or do you remain fairly optimistic going into 2022?
So I'll be honest, I am kind of concerned because I do think the Deebo Samuel situation, if it doesn't get situated right, like you're saying, it is by the draft is what's going to tell us what's happening with Deebo, right? So if it doesn't go in the right direction with Deebo Samuel, I kind of get concerned only because the 49ers have a young rookie quarterback coming in. They have two young offensive linemen, whoever the case, whoever's starting at on the offensive line at right guard, left guard, whether that's Brunskill, Aaron Banks at left guard. We don't know who our right tackle is. It looked like Mike McGlinchey lost a super lot of weight. So it looks like, is he going to play? Is he going to be healthy enough to play? So that concerns me for the offensive line. But going into the season with the weapons we have, Brandon Ayuk, Joanne Jennings, 49ers just signed a Malik Turner, who I think Malik Turner could actually be a contributor on this team. He's still only 26 years old. He looked fairly good in a couple of the games with the Dallas Cowboys last year that I watched. So for me, I think the 49ers are heading in the right direction. They got an upgrade at quarterback, right? That's the biggest thing that they needed, an upgrade at quarterback. But now if you decline at the center position or the offensive line position, sorry about that, then it kind of concerns me because you do have a young, inexperienced quarterback starting for you. So how can you say you've gotten better as an offense if your offensive line, which in my opinion is the biggest key for a young rookie quarterback going forward, has gotten worse? So that's my biggest concern. I think the weapons, totally fine. I think you having George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk. If Deebo Samuel's gone, I think Jawan Jennings is capable of being a low-end receiver too, and I think they would address that receiver position in the draft earlier than they needed to. So I think they're headed in the right direction outside of the offensive line, and if they could get that offensive line revamped, if Aaron Banks would come in and play right away and be very solid, if Daniel Brunskill and Jalen Moore can compete it out and the winner wins it all and they do well, right tackle is a big concern because to be honest, Mike McGlinchey did not look like a right tackle in the latest picture he posted. I don't know how recent it was. I know it was at an event, but he looked like he was about 250. He looked very slim, And that is a very big concern because his weight does fluctuate. And when his weight is down, he is not the best. He is not his best version. And that's what the 49ers need with a rookie quarterback.
I agree. I mean, when you look at it, right, a lot of people, I think it's interesting because a lot of people will focus on the negative side because the positive is so great on this offense, right? When you look at it, this receiving core is one of the best in terms of you have an all pro, and then on top of that, you have a strong receiver too with high potential in Brandon Ayuk, alongside a reliable body catching weapon in with Juwan Jennings, and then George Kittle, a former all pro at the tight end position. Left tackle's totally fine. But offensive line, it is a little bit of a concern because we don't necessarily know like how the guys opposite of like the guys right next to Trent Williams are going to fare. Alex Mack, he was in he's been married, so his offseason program hasn't really started yet. It's not necessarily a concern coming in April. He's also 1 year older. He had a good level last year. If he can maintain that, the 49ers are fine. But if as expected, his skill level is probably going to somewhat deteriorate going into his age, whatever, 37 season, I believe. Left guard, I'm confident because Kyle Shanahan was confident that he could start Aaron Banks midway last season. However, obviously, we haven't seen him in an NFL capacity. How is that adjustment going to go? Because you expect when a players start for them to go through growing pains. And so you kind of expect that in a way, although I'm less concerned about the left side than the right side, obviously. For me, the one thing that I'll say is I'm concerned, but also optimistic in a way. And that's because, to my belief, I think the 49ers are going to be significant players, especially in free agency, following the draft on May 3rd. Why? Guess what? Following the draft, you have a clear indication of what your needs are going into the season. In addition, May 3rd is when the compensatory formula no longer exists, meaning the 49ers can go ahead and sign whoever they like without the cost. And there are currently some really good players out there in free agency who haven't signed, right? Tyrann Mathieu is still out there. I don't know if the 49ers are in him, but one guy that I really like on the offensive line is center J.C. Treader, who's a veteran presence who could slide in at right guard for a year and then move out to center and be the anchor of this 49ers offensive line for years to come. And you can sign him where he might normally cost a third or fourth round compensatory pick. You can sign him without having that baggage attached. And that's why I don't necessarily think they're done, even in free agency, because the 49ers are methodical, right? They held on to Jimmy Garoppolo. They didn't want to give up any value because they're so attached to the certain value that they receive for players. And so now during that portion of the time, when Jimmy Garoppolo might be healthier and when you might be able to cut him without any ramifications, you can go out and sign players without any extra baggage as well, which is why, yeah, I'm somewhat concerned, but I'm also optimistic heading into 2022.
And I think you had a great point when you say that you could get some players after the compensatory pick deadline and when all that stuff happens, and
Right.
it doesn't count against players that you sign and who let go. And I think a player who I think the 49ers should be actually in, even though he didn't have a good season last year, is actually Julio Jones. A player who could come in and he knows Kyle Shanahan's offense. He gets along with some of the players on the team. He talks to a few of them. So that is a player, if Deebo Samuel does get traded or does get moved, you're not going to rely on him because you already have guys like Brandon Ayuk. You have guys like George Kittle in the passing game where you don't have to rely on a aging Julio Jones in this offense. But Julio Jones still showed when he is healthy, he is a legit receiver. And if you could use him as a receiver 2, receiver 3 in Kyle Shanahan's offense, he's only going to get better or make the offense get better. Not him get better, but he's only going to make this offense better. So those are guys like that. Tyrann Mathieu, you could go out and get. You can still get better in terms of that. There are a few offensive linemen who, like you said, J.C. Treader. There's also a few tight ends out there who could come in and potentially help out. They did re-sign Ross Dwelly. But stuff like that is, I think the 49ers are on good track with their offense because at the end of the day, what a lot of fans get confused and get carried away with is the 49ers have not lost Kyle Shanahan, right? Everyone is at this point where they're like, oh, well, the 49ers, blah, 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 like they've lost all their centers or all their guards and they haven't signed anyone to help their offense or their defense. It's like, well, Kyle Shanahan is their offense. He upgraded at quarterback last year. That is the big upgrade on offense. And that is what everyone has been calling for years. For the last couple of years, everyone has been calling for that. It happens, and then everyone's frustrated that it happened. They're frustrated that Kyle Shanahan isn't doing this and Jimmy's still on the roster. I get that. I understand that Jimmy Garoppolo is a bird with all the money that is sitting there. I'm pissed off that he's still on the roster. I absolutely am. And if I could tell you, Rohan, like what you could do to get rid of him and how they could have traded him and how they could have saved that money and used that
Right.
money in other places, it would have been great. But the thing is with the 49ers is like we're saying is the draft compensation that they're looking for him. And then he pulled that quick move on getting his shoulder surgery. And for him to do that, it speaks volumes on in my opinion, on who he is. Because if he really did that behind their back, saying, you know what, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to rehab it and then do that, it just shows who he is. And I think the 49ers are eventually in a situation where they could allow him to heal up, cut him while he's healthy, and he has nowhere to go. Yes, he might go in and try to compete for a starting job after all these teams have drafted quarterbacks, have signed quarterbacks, but it's going to make his life a lot harder to get himself back in the NFL.
Right.
So I think
Definitely.
that's the biggest reason that he hasn't been signed or wasn't cut. I mean, you're not going to cut a quarterback who has a winning record like him and has that camaraderie with all these players in the locker room. So I think one of the biggest things for the 49ers organization, they need to buckle down and be prepared to have Jimmy ride with us into training camp. He won't get any reps in training camp, but be prepared for that because the 49ers don't need that $25 million to do what they want. If they really wanted to, they could manipulate the cap space. They could go out and sign Tyrann Mathieu. They could have signed any free agent they wanted if they really wanted to by manipulating the cap, pushing cap down the line when cap actually increases. I think the 49ers are actually in a good spot offensively going forward.
Right, and I agree. I mean, I think for them, especially when you recoup value, that's where the compensatory formula being no longer being a problem kind of comes in. So I do expect them, especially going into training camp where the majority of their offseason program will occur. I do expect them to add extra bodies wherever they don't recoup players in the draft to address those needs and just have the most solidified roster going into 2022. And while I don't necessarily know if Garoppolo makes it to training camp, just depending on how he heals and whenever he clears his medical, I do think, yeah, definitely that the 49ers are in a good spot going in, regardless of how regardless of how the quarterback situation plays out, whenever Garoppolo gets moved on from. I do think they're in a good spot where they can definitely compete with the roster they have right now. I mean, there's a reason, right, that the 49ers are still considered a contender in the NFC. At least I have them as a top three contender in the NFC behind the Buccaneers and behind the Rams because they haven't significantly decreased to the point that other teams have significantly decreased this offseason. So when I look at it that way, yeah, I do think the 49ers are still in a great spot offensively. And people might even consider the offense the weakest spot on this team as compared to the next side that we're going to talk about, which is the defense. And that, it seems like, especially with the continuity that you'll have, where you have your same defensive coordinator and you have a good amount of returning options. Yeah, it seems like, the defense still remains fairly strong going to 2022. What are your thoughts on the direction on that side of the ball?
I think the defensive side of the ball is actually trending up big time because what happens now is you let go of some aging veterans, right? You let go of K'Wan Williams. Jaquasi Tart hasn't came back yet. There's possibility he returns. I don't see that happening, but there is that possibility if the 49ers strike out on a safety in the draft. I think they could honestly call Jaquasi Tart, bring him back. I'm not with it, but I understand if they do it, right? But now
Right.
you go out and you sign a cornerback who is trending up in the right direction to be a legit cornerback one. At worst, he is a high end cornerback two, and he has shown that in the NFL that he is capable of being a high end number two throughout his career. A lot of people say he was a cornerback one in Kansas City. From what I saw, he's a cornerback two growing into being a cornerback one. I mean, that is a great thing to have for this defense, right? Because you had Emmanuel Mosley, who had hell of a year, who was a solid cornerback two, is a fringe high-end cornerback two at times, and sometimes plays like a legit lockdown corner. You also have young rookies who are coming into their second year, Ambry Thomas, Diamond Lenore. Those two young guys can replace K'Wan Williams in the slot. So you have a lot of options at corner now, and it was a position of need for a while for the 49ers the last couple of years. Everyone's saying, oh, draft a corner, sign a corner. They sign a very good corner. And then the fan base is still like, well, they didn't sign the corner we wanted. At first, I was like that. I was like, well, I wanted J.C. Jackson. I wanted Carlton Davis. But at the same time, you can't get picky in the NFL at the same time when we're saying we need to extend Deebo Samuel, we need to extend Nick Bosa, right? So they did what they had to do, and they got better at corner. Now their entire cornerback core is deeper than it has been in recent years. Um, they have Jimmy Ward still in the backfield, commanding that secondary, which is a great leader to have. Fred Warner, Azeez Al-Shaair, and the linebacking core, that is very solid. Now, at the defensive line position, you do lose DJ Jones, but you do bring in a guy, Hassan Ridgeway, who could kind of play that DJ Jones role on third downs as a pass rusher inside. As a run stuffer, he has his moments where he is terrible in the run game, but he also has his moments where he's very good. But I think the 49ers are banking on Javon Kinlaw, who has stated he is healthier than he ever has before on our SF 49ers with Brad Graham. So that is, or the SF Niners. Sorry, there's too many of them that have the same name. With Brad Graham, that's the main thing with our guy Brad Graham. So Javon Kinlaw is the big reason, in my opinion, they let DJ Jones walk. You're not going to sign a defensive tackle with that much money, and it doesn't make sense in roster building to have a $10 million defensive tackle. They have Arik Armstead, who is much better than the fan base gives him. I don't care what his stat line is. He does everything day in, day out. During games, he does the dirty work that fans do not notice. It goes unnoticed because it's not on the stat sheet, and it bothers me because a lot of people just want to see the stats. I understand that. But when you're doing the dirty work and you're being that player who consistently is on the field, we got to remember Arik Armstead has been on the field every game the past couple seasons. So that is a big plus. Nick Bosa's coming off a 16-sack season. He's trending to be the defensive player of the year. That I believe he is going to be the defensive player of the year next year in the same system, going with another guy on the opposite of him. The 49ers have a couple guys, Samson Ebukam, Charles Omenihu. They have I like this comment. I'll get to Kevin Gibbons right now. I think Kevin Gibbons is a solid defensive tackle. I think he's better as a quick twitch in the pass game. He can't really anchor down because of his size. From what I've seen, I think he could get better at that. That means adding a little bit more size and being a more consistent. What I call it, you grab the grass. When you're anchoring, you grab grass. He can't really grab grass because of his size. So that's something he could work on. But I think the defensive line is the key to this defense, and I think it's a phenomenal defensive line, even though they lost guys like Arden Key, DJ Jones. And I think the 49ers defense is going to continue being a top 5 defense in the NFL. And that is the biggest thing that the 49ers rely on, their defense and their run game that we have not talked about yet. And we'll get to that run game in a few.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The defense, well, I don't know necessarily if it's trending up. I do think that they've improved in certain aspects. The one pushback I'll give is at the safety position, where I've been like, I kind of disagreed with their kind of choice at safety this year. I thought that they could have gone back and gotten a better veteran, more established veteran at the safety position itself. Although I applaud them for going with the special teams direction with George Odom. I thought that with the amount of safety talent on the board and with the lack of market towards safeties, they could have gotten it. But then again, I'm not closing the door out. Because like I said, after May 3rd, they can sign players at their discretion. A guy that I really like that could work really well with Jimmy Ward in that kind of like free safety type of role is Terrell Edmonds, who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. What is Terrell Edmonds' strong suit? Is his coverage. He's not a great run defender, but guess what? What do the 49ers have in players like Talanoa Hufanga and George Odom? Stout tacklers, which means they're solid in run defense. So when you know it's a run defense type of down, you have certain safeties that you can plug and play in, and instead you can have guys like Terrell Edmonds go. Obviously, this is somewhat contingent on them not drafting a safety, unless they do want to move on from Terrarius Moore and are comfortable in carrying 5 safeties for 2022, which is unorthodox of them. But I do think that the 49ers did downgrade currently at safety, although it does give you room to potentially draft a safety to be the starter day one. However, the one thing that I don't necessarily like about the 49ers is when they have holes, they tend to address holes over best player available early in the draft. And that's something that they do have at safety. So I'm hoping that they don't overvalue a certain safety or two on their board because of the hole that they've created at safety by not bringing in a more established veteran at safety. However, at cornerback, they've gotten better. A lot of people were clamoring at the cornerback room last year when it wasn't nearly as bad. It was probably middle of the pack, especially despite having those veterans. It was middle of the pack, and a lot of people were clamoring at the cornerback position. The 49ers responded. They got the third best corner on the market behind who? J.C. Jackson and Carlton Davis. They got the third highest paid cornerback on the market in Charvarius Ward, who, like Marco said, was pretty good in man coverage with the Kansas City Chiefs. One of the best, especially in 2021, and I think he's on the rise. He's only 25 years old, as opposed to a Stephon Gilmore, who, while he has veteran leadership, is on the decline of his career at on the wrong side of 30, which you don't necessarily want to give a long-term extension to. So I do like the move for Tarvarius Ward. I think that they've made small key additions on the defensive line. How are they going to replace the production of DJ Jones in the run game? Hopefully Javon Kinlaw lives up to expectations and can build it. But like Marco said, what's the biggest kind of aspect of that run game? It's Arik Armstead. In the first 8 games of the 49ers season last year, we struggled in the run game. We gave up over 100 yards on multiple occasions last year. However, in the last 10 games when we slid Arik Armstead in opposite of DJ Jones, we only gave up 100 yards once. And that was on a 73-yard punt return, fake punt, which gave the Seattle Seahawks 146 yards throughout the entire game. So our run defense was stout with Arik Armstead on the inside, which is why I think he's the primary building block, which is why I'm also not as worried about the defensive line, given the amount of depth and talent that we have at the position and that we continue to address it. I think that we can even get better with a guy like Kemoko Turay, who we brought in for a visit. And I do think our special teams unit is even better. So I'll end it there. But special teams is kind of, in my opinion, the place where we improve the most. What do you think about the direction of the franchise, especially addressing something that they haven't really addressed to a high capacity in previous years?
I think something that, but before I get to the special teams unit, I want to talk about something you
Go for
said.
it.
You said Terrell Edmonds being a player of the 49ers to go and sign it. They do that. That would, in my opinion, if they do it as late as they can without losing compensatory picks later in the
Right.
drafts, that would be the steal signing of the offseason, in my opinion, because he is a player
Mhm.
that comes in, plug and play. He is a younger version, I guess, of Tart, but I think he has more upside than Tart has ever had in his career in terms of
Right.
being a little more versatile. So I think I would actually really like that. But I think with the 49ers have put themselves in a great situation to go out and draft a center. They met with Leano O'Neal, who some people are very big fans of. I'm not too crazy over him. I think he's a little too slow to be a safety in the NFL, in my opinion. I think his reaction skills, his tight hips, that's just something that I think the 49ers should not look at because the NFL is speed. And with how fast all these receivers are coming out and how fast receivers are becoming, I think that is a situation for disaster and having a guy who cannot run with these fast guys. So I think they should look at one of the more athletic, the more sound safeties in the draft. A guy like Marquise Bell, a guy like Nick Cross, Jaquez Brisker from Penn State, guys like that, or guys that could come in immediately, plug and play, and help this defense and make the defense better at safety. But if they opt to go with a guy like O'Neal or Odom, I think the biggest factor is Jimmy Ward, because Jimmy Ward did the same thing, and he'll do the same thing he did for Jaquaski Tart. He will be able to be a guy that makes sure they don't look bad in terms of what they are doing because he does so much in that secondary. And I think that's the biggest thing the 49ers have to look forward at. But I also think the 49ers need to look forward to eventually having to replace Jimmy Ward. He's also 30 years old, going up his upper career at the end of his career, where you have to start looking at that. So I think that's a situation where I think draft is a big, big need, even if they bring in Terrell Edmonds, because you have to have someone to eventually replace Jimmy Ward. Going into special teams, that is a huge unit the 49ers just upgraded. Because when we look at the special teams unit, they brought in guys like Odom, Burks, McLeod, Turner, who's a special teams unit guy. Who also I'm missing on the special teams? Signed someone else. That
They
might be
signed
it.
Larry McLeod. They signed like you said, Burks. They signed
Odom,
George Odom. Yeah, and then who else are we thinking about?
Malik
Um,
Turner. He's
Malik
a
Turner
special
and the
teams
two
player.
Marcus Johnson as well, the receiver that we got. I
I
mean,
don't think
Dominic
Marcus
Johnson
Johnson
as
makes
well.
the rocks. I don't think Marcus Johnson makes the roster, but
Mhm.
he does have special team upside. If he does, I think Malik Turner would actually make the roster over him. But going into the special teams unit, one of the worst special teams unit in all of NFL last year. It was a reason the 49ers lost a few games last year. In reality, they were giving up touchdowns and they were giving up a lot of field to these teams that should not have gotten the ball at the 40-yard line. They should have had the ball at 20, but the special teams covering unit was very bad. They upgraded a special teams coordinator. They brought in Brian Schneider. They let go of Hightower. That is an upgrade. You're upgrading the team, the worst unit on your team, and a lot of fans it bothers me a lot because we have a lot of, I shouldn't say we have a lot, but there's a lot of fans on Twitter who during the season are like, oh, special teams is trash, blah blah blah, and then during the offseason we're upgrading at special teams. They're like, well, special teams doesn't even matter. They only play about 10 plays all game, but those 10 plays dictate where your offense or where your defense is starting on the field, and that is a big key. So there's been studies on depending on where you get the ball. If you get the ball at the 40-yard line, the odds of you scoring is a lot higher than if you get the ball at the 30. It's a lot higher if you get the ball at the 20. So those 10 yards, those 20 yards dictate games, and people don't realize that the NFL and football in general is a game of inches. So now when it's a game of inches and you're giving them 20 yards, 10 yards, that is huge in the NFL, especially when you're playing against guys like Tom Brady, guys like Russell Wilson last year. We played against Matthew Stafford. That is freaking key in the NFL. You're telling me that if we're to give Matthew Stafford the ball at the 40-yard line, our defense is going to be able to hold him every single drive? Absolutely not. I love what the 49ers did going out and signing special team guys, being able to upgrade. And these aren't just special team guys that can or strictly special teams. Burks is a guy who could step in at linebacker and he could provide depth at linebacker. He's not just a special teams ace. Oh, George Odom. He's a guy when he's been on the field, and I've talked to some Colts scouts, and they said honestly, when he's on the field, he is much better than his PFF grade. He's much better than the grades he was given.
Right.
For what he was asked to do, he does well. So I'm very glad the 49ers upgraded at special teams as well.
I agree totally. Like when you look at the statistics, it backs what the 49ers, like what you say about the 49ers, right? They were 22nd in the NFL in return average allowed last year. They gave up 23.1 yards allowed per kickoff last year, and it wasn't better in regards to punt returns. And what's the entire point of what we're saying here? The entire point of what we're saying here is that the 49ers can't give up this field position because obviously, like the increase in field position helps offenses, decrease in field position helps defenses. And so that's why the 49ers went out and got this, because not only do special teams just mean kick returners and punt returners, it means stout tacklers because you don't give up those extra yardage. One guy that I'll talk about quick, George Odom, like you said, well, Colt scouts rave about him, who he played for the last 20 years, or sorry, the last few years. And so when you look about it, 2020 was George Odom's best year. He was an all-pro special teamer, an all-pro special teamer that we're getting at $3.95 million a year. It's not really that at all. And so when you look at it, George Odom, great signing for special teams specifically, one of the best tacklers in football. He had 20 special teams tackles, which led the NFL in 2020, and he really rarely missed tackles. So that's something important when you consider your special teams unit, especially on kick and punt return units, where we ranked 23rd in the entire of the NFL per Football Outsiders last year. And the biggest, most underrated consideration when we talk about our special teams unit isn't a player; it's our coach. We upgraded a coach, Brian Schneider, formerly of the Seattle Seahawks, where he had top 10 units for them, like for a good amount of time at his time with Seattle, including as high as third, I believe, in 2019 when he was with Seattle. Obviously, in 2020. Obviously, last year was an outlier because he coached for the Jacksonville Jaguars, where obviously with the lack of talent, it might not be as high. But when he had the players that when he had players to develop on special teams, he worked it out. He was a top 3 unit in 2020, and I think that that's the direction the 49ers need to go in, more towards the former half of the teams on special teams rather than the latter half of the NFL. So that's why I think I'm really impressed by the 49ers. Whereas they might have not gotten better in offense and defense, they certainly got better at special teams with the additions of not only a better kick returner and a punt returner or a McLeod, but also with the tackling unit with Oren Burks, who's essentially another Demetrius Flannigan Fouls, more the merrier. And then you have other positions like George Odom and also guys like we said, like Malik Turner, who have special teams experience. And so I think that that's important because you're really, really going towards that unit and solidifying that, which decreases the margin of error, increases the margin of error because you no longer have to worry about a unit as heavily as you did in 2020, which lost you a certain amount of games in 2020, like the Seattle game in week 4.
So I'm going to go through it real quick. All right. We're going to go offense. We're going to go position. And it's just a quick one word, better or worse. Okay. Quarterback.
Better.
Receiver.
Better.
I would say better as well because of the depth at the end.
Yeah.
Getting guys like Raymond McLeod, Malik Turner, better. Offensive line.
Worse.
Let's go tight end, the same.
I'd say same, yeah.
So the offense is actually, based on what we said, probably has gotten better because quarterback is the most important position on offense. Yeah, the offensive line is going to struggle at the beginning of the season, but with a quarterback like Trey Lance, with the mobility he has, the pocket presence that he's shown in a couple games, that's going to increase. Go into defense.
Mm-hmm.
Defensive line.
Worse.
You say worse?
I think they got barely worse. It's not that big of a deal, but I do think they got somewhat worse because of the unknown of Javon Kinlaw.
I say they stay the same because of the
That's fair.
guys they brought in, like obviously Hassan Ridgeway, and then the trade from Charles Omenihu. I think he's going to step up. They're going to play him a little bit more inside. I think that's going to kind of evens out. Secondary. Yeah. Let's go corner.
Corner better.
Safety.
Worse.
I agree. They've gotten a little bit worse, depending on what they do in terms of if they bring in another guy or draft.
Right, draft obviously will change a good amount, but yeah, at the moment worse.
Which I think when they do draft that safety, depending on what safety it is, I'm pretty confident I'm going to be saying better. Linebacker.
Better. They got Oren Burks.
I agree. Special teams.
Better.
So if we said worse on only two position categories that we could have three. So you said defensive line, offensive line, and safety. The 49ers have gotten worse, but every other position they got either better or stayed the same, which is a great thing because when you're looking at the NFL, you're trying to either get better in certain positions that you lacked or stay the same at those positions that you're already very good at, like linebacker, defensive line, receiver, and stuff like that. So that's very good to see. So going into the NFL draft, something that you and I keep talking about, what are the main positions of need on this 49ers roster, in your opinion?
Right. So we talked about certain positions that got worse and certain positions that stayed the same. And just looking at that, right, safety is the position where I think we got worse. I do think that we should address the safety position fairly early in the draft, be it with one of our second-round picks or one of our third-round picks. And I mean, I'm fine with it being a fourth-round pick too, but I do believe that that should be a early day 3 pick at the latest, just because I think there is the importance to not necessarily grab a run support type of free safety, but instead a more of a free safety guy where you have an athleticism type of build, because that's what best fits this 49ers defense when they have their safety rotation. So that's a position that I believe they should address. I do believe that they should address edge because when we look at it 2 years ago, they didn't have much depth. But what do they have? They had that veteran D Ford who was the mentor to rookie Nick Bosa. Now Nick Bosa is the veteran. You can get your rookie, kind of get your duo of the future in a way. But now you also have the depth to where if the rookie takes a little bit of time to acclimate to the NFL level, you're not necessarily as hurt, especially if you sign Kimoko Toure, because you have such depth at defensive end. So I do think that defensive end, while it might not necessarily be a need, I think that it'd be a priority given the importances on this 49ers football team. So I'll start with those two. What do you think?
So I think clearly defensive end and safety are the biggest needs on the roster. But honestly, I don't even think defensive end is that big of a need, right? Because when we have guys like Charles Omenihu, who they traded for, Jordan Willis, we also have Samson Mabuka. The depth is there. The depth is there.
Right.
Now, do you want to pair someone with Nick Bosa for the long run? Absolutely. And this is a draft where you could find a guy in the third or fourth round to pair with Nick Bosa for the long run so they could wreak havoc. So I think that is a
For sure.
position of need because you want that high upside guy who alongside Nick Bosa, they could be that running mate. I
Mhm.
think safety is also a big need. And I've been seeing Nick Cross being walked to the 49ers at 61, actually. And that is a pick that I would not mind at all because he
Yeah.
has all the traits that I like in a safety. He's shown the ability to take away the ball. He has the speed and the range to be a free safety like Jimmy Ward has been. He's a very stout tackler around the line of scrimmage. So that's stuff that it kind of sounds like Jimmy Ward, a miniature version of Jimmy Ward. So that is something I would really like the 49ers to be able to do. I also think receiver. If I wasn't to go edge, I would go receiver. A lot of people would go, well, why would you go receiver and not offensive line or defensive line or defensive tackle? Because receiver, at the end of the day, we have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, and that's about it. Those are the only three players on the roster that we could actually count on to produce in the receiving room. And with as deep of a class that receiver is, you
Right.
have to address receiver at some point. I would rather it be sooner than later because of the way the draft is, you could go safety, receiver, and then edge because the edge is so deep. You could go edge in the fourth round and still get a starter. You might be able to get D'Angelo Malone in the fourth round. So or even Dominique Robinson in the fourth round. So you got the depth edge is so deep. I don't mind going in the fourth round and still getting a guy who has high upside. So I think the 49ers should go safety, receiver, and then edge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a solid argument for receiver, especially like if we trade Deebo Samuel, I hope it doesn't happen, but if we do, then receiver comes to the number one need
Rohan,
on this team.
did you just say you want the Niners to trade Deebo Samuel?
Oh, whoa, 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 whoa.
Oh
Uh-oh,
my
Twitter canceled. Twitter
God.
canceled.
Whoa.
No,
Did you
I said
guys
it.
I know everyone listening heard that. I really believe that Rohan just said the 49ers will trade Deebo Samuel. You heard that here first. I'm getting that on record. I'm gonna change what you said.
The funny thing is, you're the guy like somewhat like being more open to the idea while I'm the proponent to sign him. But yeah,
Look, hey, I just it's not necessarily me. Like I understand. Like obviously, I'm a big Deebo Samuel fan, right? Like that's one of my
right.
favorite players on the 49ers. But I understand the business side of football. I want players to get paid. I am a pro player in the terms of contract negotiations. I want all players to get paid. I don't care who they are. I don't care what team they're on. I want players to get paid because I understand the way the NFL works and the way they use these players and stuff like that. So I understand that, but at the same time, I understand if you can't pay Deebo Samuel, get everything you can now. Sell high before anything. So that's why I understand it. But if I had to choose, I would pay Deebo Samuel whatever the hell he wants. It's not
Yeah,
my
I
money. I
mean,
don't care.
yeah, definitely. But when I think about receiver in this draft, right, assuming the 49ers obviously keep Deebo Samuel, I'll disagree a bit. I don't necessarily think it should be as high on their demands. I think that there's better talent in the later rounds of this class. In the fifth and the sixth round, especially when the 49ers have picks at pick 172, 220, and 221 with the ammo to trade up earlier, should they want a deep threat receiver? I think that with the amount of deep threats, you'll still find talent in this draft. And I trust the ability to develop receivers. We've developed fairly well, especially over the last couple of years with Deebo Samuel, with obviously Brandon Ayuk and then Jawan Jennings, right? So I
Don't
do
forget
believe.
Kendrick Bourne.
Oh, Kendrick Bourne as well who was I believe an undrafted free agent, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so we have a good like I know a lot of people will like to point to Dante Pettis and things like that, but I think in the recent kind of era, we've been able to draft receivers fairly well, which is why I'm more comfortable going towards other positions of need, potentially even offensive line in the earlier rounds, because I do believe with such a deep class, we'll be able to find strong talent at receiver with that burner type of speed, which is what we currently lack in this room. And still be fine going into 2022 with a strong receiving core that encapsulates such a diverse group, right? Because you have your big threat in Juwan Jennings, you have your do-it-all player, Mr. Gadget in Deebo Samuel, you have your shifty route runner in Brandon Ayuk, then you'll have a deep threat from the rookie class and a guy who can work with the ball in his hands and Ray McLeod. So I do think that a diverse room would help, but I don't necessarily think that we have to go towards it in the earlier rounds, although that's not meaning I wouldn't mind the pick if it is the best player available on the 49ers board.
Let's say the 49ers, so a lot of people are sleeping on a receiver, and it's a receiver that I really like. There's two, actually, I'm gonna throw two names out there because I really like both of these. So Skye Moore and John Michie. I really like both of these receivers, right? I can see the 49ers if Skye Moore is there at 61. That is that he has Kyle Shanahan written all over his forehead. Like literally, like that is the ideal Kyle Shanahan receiver, right? He has a lot of Deebo Samuel abilities to make guys miss, to get the yard after the catch, but he also has that Brandon Ayuk style at the line of scrimmage, the release package, the hand, the ability to go up and get it, the ability to do it all, right? So I could see Kyle Shanahan going, man, I actually have a quarterback that could throw the ball. At some point, do you remember when? Let me just ask you this, because this is more so you and I just having that talk now, or like we're in the barbershop, right? You know, do you remember when the Atlanta Falcons, right, when they were playing with Kyle Shanahan, Matt Ryan, and they had Taylor Gabriel,
Taylor Gabriel.
They had Mohamed Sanu, Julio Jones, and they had another receiver as well who I can't remember the name, but Kyle Shanahan used to spread it out with Matt Ryan, and he used to let Matt Ryan let it rip. Do you think Kyle Shanahan is that? Because we heard Kyle Shanahan say, right, where it was like Kyle Shanahan was like, oh yeah, I remember on the way back from Trey Lance's pro day, I was already drawing a play, like I was already so this and that. Do you think Kyle Shanahan is finally pulling out the spread and going to start spreading a little bit teams out and go to what the NFL is pushing for?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's a possibility, right? When you look at Trey Lance's throw chart from week 16, I think that that's the most telling sign of what you can expect. And that was when Kyle Shanahan didn't necessarily call up the best game plan in the first half too. You see it's left, middle, right, at all three levels of the field, because that's what Trey Lance is capable of doing. And that's the best element of Kyle Shanahan, when he's able to spread the ball to all sorts of the field. And that's why I think it's so important that he has this wide receiver group that's so diverse, because you have the different receivers that are capable of doing different things, meaning you can hit different aspects of the field, right? You want a short out route, Juwan Jennings with this crisp route running in the out routes and that short intermediate range is there. You want that guy that you can get the ball to in the middle of the field and have him work. Deebo Samuel's there. You want a guy in the backfield who might be able to make plays when you give him like just a bubble screen. Raymond McLeod is there. Like, you have such a diverse group, meaning you can do so many different things. And I think that's so important on Shanahan offense. And hence the receiver group, not necessarily maybe the quarterback, but the receiver group is why he's able to scheme up so many open receivers, because there's the endless amount of possibilities that with Kyle Shanahan's brain and with his offensive capacity, that he's able to scheme them so open. And then obviously everyone works well after the play.
So what you're telling me is it wouldn't hurt for Kyle Shanahan, because with how creative Kyle Shanahan is, right? Like, and the 49ers have this tendency where they like to rotate a lot of their receivers in and out. Like, for example, we've seen Travis Benjamin actually getting run in the playoffs. We've seen him like towards the end of the season and in the playoffs, actually. So would it be wise for Kyle Shanahan to actually take a higher end receiver who potentially could be that dude, and then eventually, let's say he starts ascending in his second and third year, and then going into his fourth year, now that is a guy who eventually you could trade, or eventually, like let's say Brandon Ayuk is tearing it up, and you could trade Brandon Ayuk because he's going to cost more money, but you keep the young guy. Like, for me, it's roster building, and it's not necessarily only 1 year. It's like years and years and years. So for me, it's like it makes sense for Kyle Shanahan to go receiver and guys like that, like Skye Moore, who should be there in the draft at 61. Potential Christian Watson, a fan favorite, stuff like that. I don't mind them doing that, but I get what you're saying. Like, the versatility in a Kyle Shanahan offense brings out the best in Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I wouldn't be opposed. What I meant was I wouldn't be opposed. Like, while it wouldn't be my primary option, I wouldn't be opposed to a receiver at 61, just because I know that it'll work in Kyle Shanahan's offense, right? I said this earlier today in a Twitter space. There's not like when you look at the receiver room right now, regardless of who's there right now, Kyle Shanahan finds a way to get players on the field. Trent Sherfield played in more snaps in week one than Brandon Ayuk played. He played in 27% of the offensive snaps. Ayuk played in 26. So Kyle Shanahan, like I know that's just one example, but Benjamin was on the field for some deep threat throws. Trent Sherfield was on the field for certain plays. I mean, Mohamed Sanu was on the field for certain plays as well. Like you have a group of 6 receivers that have somewhat of an offensive role. And I mean, I think that there is value to that when you have such a diverse group, which you can do with the addition of a guy like Skye Moore, right? Who's got the ability to stretch the field, who's got the ability to work inside and in the slot and just to help out this offense. So I do think the potential is there. However, I do think though, with the ever mounting amount of receivers that continuously come out of the draft, being 15, 20 good options out of the draft every year, I don't necessarily know that it would be value-wise great for you to select a receiver early. And while the aspect of getting a receiver and then trading one and succumbing or acquiring the best value for them sounds super pleasing from a business standpoint, I don't necessarily know chemistry-wise how that would fit in a locker room in the NFL level, because people then know, like the 49ers don't have that, right? They normally have a tendency to pay their own players apart from DeForest Buckner, who was the anomaly. But if you set a precedent for trading these players,
Kendrick Bourne.
huh?
They didn't pay Kendrick Bourne.
But no. What I mean is they didn't extend those certain players. Like Kendrick Bourne was a free agent. Obviously, they couldn't match the money that other teams have. But when it's in their own realm, when they have the capacity to do so without like offers from other players, I don't necessarily. I think they're on the verge of where they tend to pay those type of players. And I think that if you change somewhat of that narrative,
but why not pay a guy like Kendrick Bourne when he was essentially your receiver 2, receiver 1 at sometimes, like, you know what I mean? Like,
that was because of injury, right? Like Richie James had 100.
But the thing though is Kendrick Bourne didn't get cashed out. Like he didn't get paid. His contract was very cost controlling for the 49ers to bring him back. Like, why not have Kendrick Bourne, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo?
Right. But what it would be is if you're at least at that time, right, in 2019, you're paying Kendrick Bourne like $7.5 million a year for 3 years to be your wide receiver number 3. Deebo and Ayuk were wide receiver 1 and 2. And I know in this NFL age where you might pay wide receivers like that, you're not necessarily paying Kendrick. You shouldn't be paying Kendrick Bourne $7.5 million when you can just get a new Kendrick Bourne in the draft in a way. I'm just saying, when the 49ers have the ability to acquire top-end talent and then develop that top-end talent, I don't think Kendrick Bourne was a wide receiver 1 by any means. I think that if he was ever in that role for the 49ers, it was because of injury. I mean, we've seen in 2020 the amount of injuries that happened in the wide receiver room. But to me, I didn't think that, I mean, I was fine with it. I think they got outbid.
Kendrick, he didn't. How they get outbid? They're paying the Patriots are paying Kendrick. No,
7.5
3 years. No, it's 3 years, $15 million. I thought, man. I'm looking.
No, I mean that's the guarantee. That's the guarantee. Yeah.
The $7 million total guaranteed is nothing for a guy like Kendrick Bourne, a guy who produced on the field and was a locker room, a guy everyone loved in the locker room. You know what I mean? So like, why not keep Kendrick Bourne around? I understand they thought maybe Jawan Jennings that previous year, the year that he got drafted, he was so banged up when they needed receivers, but he might have flashed enough in practice and everything. But you were relying on an injured 7th round pick, right, to produce the same thing that Kendrick Bourne could produce, right? Obviously, he ended up doing it, so it worked out, right? But for me, it's like, why not like bring a guy back like that when he had never done anything wrong? He was a good guy with the fan base. He was a good guy in the locker room. He produced on the field when his number was called, and he's not getting paid that much money. The $7 million guaranteed is literally receiver 3 money, and he played, in my opinion, he played very well with the New England Patriots. He played like a legit number 2 receiver, and I think
he played well. But like in defense, I'll say, why not pay Arden Key $4 million? That's definitely worth what, like, he's worth $4 million based on the season that he produced. 49ers chose not to pay him $4 million. Like, why not pay like a guy? Sure, you have depth, but Arden Key would have been a starter on this team at the pass rushing down. So why not pay him $4 million in that? Like, I think it's the same argument in a way where while it's valuable to have that player, at the price that they're commanding, you can find replacements that can fill that role. And especially now, that's not on defense, that's on offense. Kyle Shanahan's forte, where he knows that he can get players open and he knows that he can get the best out of 7th-round picks like Juwan Jennings. And that's kind of my take on
Repeat
that.
what you just said before you said about Juwan Jennings. Repeat what you said about Kyle Shanahan knowing he could get guys open. Repeat that real quick.
Kyle Shanahan knows he can get guys open.
So that's why he's not going to want to pay Deebo Samuel. Think about it, Rohan. Even so, who was it that they said? Even I think Peter King kind of mentioned it, like, or was it Peter King or someone else? They said that they don't believe Deebo Samuel is the route runner, the guy who gets himself open, and Kyle Shanahan does all that. I don't know who it was, but they said that either yesterday or today or yesterday. And for me, it's literally why I think the 49ers might end up trading Deebo Samuel, because of the ego that Kyle Shanahan has. And you said it right now. And I'm not saying
No,
this
you're
like
right.
to call you out or anything, right? Because
Yeah.
this is something that Kyle Shanahan really, really feels, is he could do anything and he could draw anybody up, and he X's and O's, he's going to get you open. That's the guy you should throw it to. He's open, right? So that's why, in my opinion, it's like, well, Deebo Samuel, should he get paid? Hell yeah, he should get paid. But if Kyle Shanahan doesn't think he should get paid, guess what's going to happen? Kyle Shanahan's not going to pay him. And if we go back to what I know we haven't talked about it, but Benjamin Albright, and I kind of turning into a Deebo Samuel a little spill right now,
Mhm.
right? But Benjamin Albright actually said last year after the season that the 49ers weren't as high on Deebo Samuel as the media was, which is very interesting, Rohan, because before his breakout year, Benjamin Albright said that the 49ers were not as high on Deebo Samuel, and he would not be shocked if he was not extended eventually, which is a very big thing for a guy like Benjamin Albright, who he is connected, he does have sources to say after his second year in the league.
And the thing is, the one thing I'll say, like that against that in a way is, I like players like Kendrick Bourne and Arden Key. Should have Kendrick Bourne been extended? That's an argument. But to me, the argument that I was originally making about how you don't trade away those premier players, the reason that I was saying that is, if you set a precedent for trading away premier players, potentially like the Jets have set, it does create some turmoil, right? Obviously, there was a lot of backlash when they consistently moved their top players for draft picks like Jamal Adams and things like that, and they didn't want to pay Marcus May. Obviously, that doesn't create the best locker room.
But at the same time, though, like, because you're trading these players away, right? Who are locker room cancers, and your team's trash anyway. So, like, at that point, it's like, well, we suck anyway. Might as well get draft capital for this dude who's not going to want to resign with us versus a 49ers team who's actually good.
Business-wise, they can, like, business-wise, you can justify the move. I'm just saying, like, the things that we don't necessarily see, I don't know how well it boils. And when you change yourselves, because the 49ers are a team that a lot of players want to come to, despite the living costs in this area. And that's because the 49ers have such a great culture, right? Arden Key himself said, I love my time with the 49ers. I'd love to resign here. And we've seen so many careers be uplifted and changed with the direction of the 49ers. I'm just saying, if you change that sort of narrative by consistently not paying players and what I mean by that is, if you start having a precedent where you consistently trade away players before you pay them, and you don't choose to pay them and then just get new players, I don't necessarily think that type of culture necessarily sustains. Whereas if you do what you've been doing so far, and keeping certain players, I'm not saying keep everybody, right? You can't do that. That just doesn't work in the fact of building a roster. But if you keep certain players and show that you have the intention of doing so, I think that does create a better culture in a way when you're being perceived by other teams.
So, but the thing though, it doesn't set that precedent if you trade a guy like Deebo Samuel, because you signed guys like Arik Armstead, you signed guys like Trent Williams, you've signed guys like Kyle Juszczyk. So you paid, and George Kittle, Fred Warner, Jimmy Ward. You show that you're capable and you're willing to pay your top guys. They're gonna pay Nick Bosa. So like, it's not really, if they trade Deebo Samuel, it's not them saying that, oh, we're not going to pay our guys, right? Because they have done that in the past. It's more so saying that, we think that we could replace his production with other guys, and we think that he's not the receiver that everyone thinks. And I think, so Kyle Shanahan has a doghouse, right? And do you remember the training camp he came in out of shape and Wes Walker was with them running?
Right.
He
Yeah.
was in Kyle Shanahan's doghouse that entire training camp for being out of shape. Like, Kyle Shanahan would bring it up out of nowhere. Like, oh, yeah, I mean, we have Wes Walker over there running with Deebo Samuel right now. Like, for no reason. Like, it was just unprecedented conversation to bring up. And I think stuff like that, it should be talked about a little bit more. And I'm just right now, me and you are just having a conversation, not so like we're not like going back and forth, whatever, because it's literally just how we talk, right?
Right.
But for me, I think there's a lot more. I think the 49ers are headed back to the state of the franchise as the episode is, and we've talked about for a good while. The 49ers, even if they trade Deebo Samuel, I think they are in a good position moving forward with the draft capital that they would get for Deebo Samuel. And you would replace Deebo Samuel with a guy like Skye Moore, potentially Christian Watson. And they could, let's say they get this year, hypothetical. Let's say they trade 2 second rounders for the New York Jets. They trade a future third and a future second. That's decent draft capital because the two second round picks they're getting this year is essentially equivalent on the draft value chart to a middle first round pick. So you could eventually trade back one of those picks. You could get a receiver. You could even get 2 receivers with those picks after a trade down. So you could replace him with a little bit of money ball that some people in the Bay Area are used to with the Oakland A's. You can play a little bit of money ball and get a guy like Skye Moore, who I think is very, very – that is Kyle Shanahan written all over him. You could get a guy like Christian Watson, who also has Kyle Shanahan written all over him because of the athletic build, the athleticism he has, and the ability to create him open in the run game and everything. So I think you could play a little bit of this and you could get the production through Moneyball by drafting 2 guys and not having to pay a guy $65-70 million in guaranteed, because I think it's going to take $65 million to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I do like. I mean, we've obviously had our Deebo episode. I do obviously agree, like not necessarily agree, but I do understand the why you would entertain a trade for Deebo Samuel. Like I understand that part. I'm not necessarily saying my argument is solely about Deebo Samuel. I'm just saying it if the 49ers choose to go on the path of where they draft a receiver and then before paying them trade that receiver and then draft another receiver, I just don't necessarily know if that's the best culture. In that case, if they continue to do it. Right now, obviously, there isn't a precedent. Right now, like even if Deebo Samuel is the first guy, I don't think that that's necessarily alarming at any point because receivers do want to reset the market, right? And obviously, there are some concerns. I agree with that point. And like we said, Kyle Shanahan knows how to get players open. So will the ramifications be seen? Yes, but maybe not to the biggest extent. I do think that we get worse without Deebo Samuel, obviously, because transitioning from him to any other player after the season he had, it is difficult. But I can definitely understand the intrigue of a trade should the terms regarding money not work out.
Yeah, and I agree with you that the way we approached it's one of those situations where the state of the franchise, let's not get the fan base really riled up, right? We think the 49ers are actually headed forward. We think they're in good hands with what they have at quarterback. Trey Lance is the future. Trey Lance will lead the 49ers to a championship during his time in San Francisco. I could promise you that. Make sure you guys quote me on that because in a few years when the 49ers win a championship, I want you to go out and say, Marco told us that we would get a championship with Trey Lance. And I'm pretty sure Rohan agrees. Take.
Yeah, I mean, let's do it. I think I definitely think the potential is there. I mean, if Trey Lance lives up to expectations of a number 3 overall pick, I don't see why not.
That's it for today's episode. The state of the 49ers franchise is heading up. We gave you a quick Deebo spill at the beginning of the podcast and towards the end of the podcast because Deebo saga is in full effect. Thank you for tuning in to the 49ers Red Zone. I'm your co-host Marco with my boy Rohan.
Have a good night, guys. We'll see